Good morning. My name is Jay, and the purpose of this video is to try and help make common sense out of a rather complex problem, and that is reverse proxy on an NGINX server environment to an Apache server so that it allows you to display a website hosted by Apache even though you're running Nginx at the same time. The core of the problem is you can't really run the same website on two different server environments. One of them is going to take priority. So in this instance, Nginx is going to really be our primary server. We want it to display the majority of our websites because it's faster. Apache, however, there's a lot of sites that require Apache because of certain htaccess settings or other settings unique to that environment. And out of the box over the years, Apache is always going to require port 80 to deliver the non-SSL pages and port 443 to deliver the SSL pages. Now, that could always be changed by people, but there was no reason to change it. It just worked, and so you just used them. Now, if you've got Nginx listening for things coming in on port 80 and Apache listening for things on port 80, Nginx wins in that equation, and I'm not sure why it always wins, but it wins, and so the Apache site would never be displayed if that's the way you intended it. So let's get right into how we make that happen. Okay, we're going to start off here on the Apache side of the equation. We are in the sites available area, and we're going to look at a virtual host. I'm going to assume you know how to create a virtual host. It's not really, this video is not about that. Okay, vim cmcmatter.biz. Okay, we're using a domain called cmcmatter.biz. You can use a domain of your own choosing. And you're going to set that up the way you would any other virtual host. You can copy and paste this. You know, where is the error log going to live? Where is the website files going to live? The index.php file or HTML, depending on your server. The server alias, wwws or other subdomains that get to the same spot in the domain name itself. But up at the top is a unique change. Normally you get an *:80 up there, and we've changed that to 2722 because we're going to serve Nginx up on 80. Now 2722 is a completely random number. We just want to make sure that it's not a port number that is commonly used by some other servers, like MySQL has its own port, Remote Desktop has its own port, SSH has its own port. Make sure you don't pick a port number that belongs to somebody else, and you can Google unused port numbers or something like that, or search, I should say, and come up with that. So that's how we set the port number as being different than Apache, but we're certainly not done yet. We also want to exit out of here, and we want to look at the Apache ports file. So we're going to vim one step up, or nano, whatever you want to use, and we're going to look at ports.conf in the Apache directory. We're going to make sure that that listen is changed to 2722 as well. And that's all the changes that need to be done on the Apache side. And I want to point out, we're not going to get into, we may get into SSL sites as we move through this. But one thing I want you to know is SSL, you don't need to configure any of that on the Apache side. You don't have to worry about, which is it, Apache or Nginx that I'm supposed to add SSL to. Port 80 and 443. What about port 443 on the Apache side? On the Apache side, it gets real easy. You create just that one virtual host file, and ultimately that's going to be good enough for both the SSL and the regular, so you can leave it right there. Now let's go over to the Nginx side of the equation. Okay, we are now in there. Nginx's sites available, just as with Apache. And we're going to edit a file that I call Apache sites. So what I've chosen to do is kind of lump all the sites that we are going to use this way with a reverse proxy into a single file. It's easier to manage, and this is how we do that. Okay, so there is a server section that's typical for Nginx. It's how it's laid out. It starts off Apache sites. We want to say that we're going to listen on 80, which is going to be the case with all of Nginx sites. But if the server name is any of the things in this string, we're going to include this proxy pass. Okay, so the server name, in my case, you see I've got the cmcmatter.biz, the www.cmcmatter. I don't have to put server alias and all that kind of stuff. I just spell it out. Now, these are regular expressions, which in essence say grab whatever's in that core domain and use the prefix test or firewall or pass or backups or jobs. And these are all subdomains that I'm also adding to this Apache sites file. And so this will handle the domain and the subdomain. Now I haven't tried, oh yes, no I have. You can even enter in a totally different domain name, whatever.com, and it will pick that up in here as well. So you can add all your Apache sites in this one string. Now, you'll have to put a unique virtual host file on the Apache side for it to be picked up by. The next one is just pointing to whatever log file I want for this this series of domains, and then finally an include to a snippet called proxy pass. Now I could have printed or placed that proxy pass language right here, but I like to use the include because it's cleaner. I might use it for other purposes, and I can always include those to the same location. So let's just take a look at what that looks like. In the sm-snippets, SM stands for server matter in my case. You can call it anything you want. It'll be okay. Okay, proxy pass, here we are. And that's what the proxy pass language looks like. So this is really important. We're listening on port 80, but any of those sites that we're listening for on port 80, we want to do something called a proxy pass to basically our local host, the same server, on port 2722. The rest of the language you can Google. It's specific to Nginx, and it helps all this become a reality. But that's how that looks. Comes in, anything coming on port 80 to this specific subset of domains, we want to do a reverse proxy and have it deliver that information based on port 2722. Now, I'm going to turn Nginx off for a second. So it's no longer listening on port 80, but you'll remember now Apache's not listening on port 80 either. It's listening on 2722. So if I type in cmcmatter.biz, I get a dead site. I expect to get a dead site because nothing's listening on port 80, and this is delivering on port 80, and there's no reverse proxy involved. Now, if I change that Apache site to 80 and restarted Apache, it would have loaded on the Apache server. But as it is now, there's nothing. Now, let's take that a step further. If I appended 2722, let me get rid of that redirect to SSL. In fact, I'm going to put in a couple of variable equal values here, which is basically a cache killer. If the browser senses there are new variables in the query string, it won't try to load the same site that it's been to before. So this is like clearing cache. And I'm going to load that up. Now you see if I put the 2722 in there, we get a website. And this is actually what's in my index.php page. So this is working normally because I put 2722. But with nothing there, I get nothing. Now, you can't really, 2722 is probably not something you're going to want to put on your business cards as, just go to my website, :2722. Your search engines are certainly not going to search and deliver on that port number. So this is where the reverse proxy comes together. Let's take a look at that. We'll go ahead and start Nginx. And as talked about, any of these sites, it's listening on 80, and for any of these sites, it's going to include that proxy pass code. And so now, because it's listening on 80 and passing it through, hold on a second. Once again, it's redirecting me to SSL, which has got to do with previous work I've done. So I've got to clear that cache to make sure it happens. There we go. And so that's what it's supposed to do, and there's no SSL involved there. I have had SSL on this domain in the past and removed it, and that's just natural behavior for the browser to try and cache it. I've also got a subdomain involved here, just to show you how subdomains work. And I'll go back to the Apache side, and you'll see it's called test.cmcmatter. Can be anything you want it to be. We're only concerned with this section right here. These are all commented out. You'll notice the 2722, same thing. So we'll go ahead and come over to Nginx. We'll look at the Apache sites, and we see we have this test and the regex code indicating that it should also be loaded as test.cmcmatter.biz. And that loads up just fine. Hello world, test subdomain, proving subs are ready to go. Now, same thing. If I had stopped Nginx right then, I would have had to put 2722 in order to reach the Apache server directly. So that's it in a nutshell. That's how reverse proxy works. This section, I want to talk about SSL and implementing SSL on a reverse proxy, because it does add another layer of confusion to the process. I like to use a wildcard SSL on any of my domains. That way we don't have to worry about, from that point forward, we just simply don't have to worry about subdomains. They're automatically included. And I do that with a line that looks like this. Now, I'm using Ansible. I don't know if you're familiar with Ansible, but that's a way to push commands out to a server in a very automated fashion. It's when I'm building a new server, this is the way that I'm going to go about it. But we'll take this down to the command line so to better make it more understandable as to what's happening here. All right, so this is the command. In fact, let me get this down a little bit lower so you can see it a little better. Okay. If you just want to make a note of this whole command, and I will try to put that in the video comments if I can remember to do so, so that you can just copy and paste it. But basically, you've got Certbot needs to be installed. In this case, force renewal. Nginx is what you don't have to worry about. Anything Apache when it's involved in the reverse proxy like this. Nothing Apache. No Apache plugins. None of that need to be considered. VVV just ensures that if there are any debugging errors, that they are more verbose so I can see them, be clear on them. Pre-hook, before it starts the process, we're going to stop the Nginx server. I can't remember what that one is, but I had picked it up along the way from a developer actually yesterday. RSA key size, basically the complexity of the key, the length of the key. Post-hook, when it's all said and done, we're going to restart the Nginx server. And agree to, by the way, DNS Cloudflare, that's a biggie. I should say my DNS is being hosted by Cloudflare, so some aspects of this are specific to them. But if your DNS is not with Cloudflare, you can just omit that. Agree tos, that means automatically say yes to the questions and the email address to associate with the certificate if they need to, it's expiring or whatever, and they need to keep in touch with you on that. We make a note here, EFF mail is an indicator that we allow the Certbot authority, which is EFF something or other, to email us if they feel it's important for one reason or another. That's optional. You can leave that out. DNS Cloudflare credentials, I'm keeping that in a secrets directory in this particular instance in the Cloudflare INI file. And that's where I would put my Cloudflare credentials. And this video doesn't cover what that's about, but that's how that's done. And lastly, the domain itself, which is cmcmatter.biz, is the core domain, and then *.cmcmatter.biz for the wildcard aspect of it, and preferred challenges DNS-01, which I'm not familiar with exactly what that's about, but you can dig into that. So if I were to run that command, it goes through the different flags that it read in that line item and very quickly gets done, followed with a congratulations, your certificate and chain has been saved at, and you want to notate where that's been saved. Okay. Now with that in mind, let's go ahead now and edit our Nginx files so that they point to and recognize, embrace, pull in this server. Okay, so now let's dig a little deeper into the SSL. We've created our certificate. It tells us here the domains that it's good for, which is our wildcard and our core. And the certificate path, it's actually stored this file in a specific place. Both of these files, we can reference that by simply doing an ls-l, taking a look at that directory with a sudo, and we can see in fact those files are in there. They've addressed full chain. Let's see, I've got full chain. Oh yeah, here we go. So full chain is a symlink pointing to a file that they've also deposited elsewhere. So those files are there as symlinks. Now, with that in mind, with these paths right here, you're going to want to copy those, and we're going to go ahead and edit that Apache sites file that we created earlier. And right here, where it says SSL cert and SSL certificate key, we're going to paste those two paths, which, as you can see, are the same paths that I have here. In fact, you can paste it, just rename the variable, and get rid of the colon, and you'll be in business. That tells the server where to find the cert associated with this domain name. Error log, same thing as above. Server line, same thing as above. Here, instead of listen 80, we're going to listen on 443 and just use this particular language, HTTP2 at the end, which frankly I'm not sure what the 2 portion stands for. Usually you'd use an S, but it works. And lastly, we want to include the sm-snippets proxy path. Goes to the very same location so that we know to call over the 2722 ports of Apache. So you'll notice we haven't changed the port number on Apache to be an SSL related port. Nginx doesn't care about that. Nginx is going to serve this site via SSL because it's controlling that with the instructions of where to find the cert. It's listening on this particular port, and if it finds it coming in on this port to any one of these sites, simply put, it's going to display the content that it finds in the Apache folders that we've got set up. So it really, it's not as complicated as it seems when looked at that way. So now we're going to hit restart the Nginx server. Fortunately, no errors. Everything looks good. Server's in place, recognized, Apache's running, Nginx is running. Now we should be able to go over to the browser and refresh this, and it works. Now let's put an HTTPS in front of that, because you notice we don't have a padlock up here right now. Okay, works with the padlock. Same thing with the test domain. Loads fine. Without HTTPS, because we didn't ask for it. It may be listening on 443, but it's also listening on 80. So it's going to give us whatever we ask for. If we enter the HTTPS, the subdomain also loads normally. Now that, of course, begs the question, how do we force it to go into HTTPS and not even give them the option of the HTTP? All right, let's talk about that. So we're going to start by editing our sites available Apache sites again. And we're going to insert one line here that says include sm-snippets force-https.ini. And we don't have to worry about the proxy pass at this point, because if I've got this right, it's just going to force HTTPS, and so we're not going to need to do a proxy pass on the non-HTTP. So let's go ahead and exit out of that and take a look at what that force snippet looks like. And it basically says if the scheme is HTTP, return HTTPS and the same information. Let's go ahead and restart Nginx. All right, no errors. Come back to the browser. Okay, we've got the non-secure site. I just went back. I didn't load it. I just hit the back arrow. Now let's go ahead and reload that. And it switched it over for us. We'll do the same thing here. We'll just go back a step, and now we'll reload the site. Okay, so reloading a non-HTTPS site from this point forward. And I'll go ahead and hard code that in for you, just so and force some variables so it doesn't remember cache. And it doesn't matter, it still pushes it over to HTTPS. So I think you've got a handle on that. That's how reverse proxy works. That's how the SSL part of the equation works. A couple of things I want to cover with you here. First of all, I found knowing what packages to install with Certbot so that it worked with both Nginx and, in my case, with Cloudflare, was its own thing. My first advice to you is do not install any Certbot-related packages using pip. I can tell you with certainty, if you use the pip packages of Certbot along with the packages for Cloudflare, there are inconsistencies there. They conflict with Certbot that might have been installed through normal apt measures. It's 5 miles of brain damage that ultimately ends up you having to completely pull Certbot out by its roots to get past it. So I've set up a routine in Ansible, and you can do this manually, excuse me, which first of all, remove the any existing versions of Certbot. So in your case, that might be sudo apt remove, -- purge space Certbot, get it out of there. Then install the latest Certbot. And then same thing with the Nginx Certbot plugin. There's a Python 3 Certbot NGINX. Go ahead and purge it, reinstall it. And here we have and that's what I'm doing there. I'm saying I'm purging it here and I'm reinstalling it below. That's what those two commands are. There's something called Python 3-acme. Purge it, reinstall it. And lastly, the Python 3 Certbot DNS Cloudflare plugin. Purge it, then reinstall it. And if you find anything related to pip, you'll have to go through the pip method of uninstalling. In my case, it often required manually locating related directories and getting them out of there if the damage was already done and you're coming on the back side of this to deal with it. If you're using Cloudflare, you've got to put your credentials in some file on your file system. The recommended from their website is create off your root directory something called secrets, and in secrets you put your 2 files, which again I'm not going to cover that in detail here, but that's where one file, your Cloudflare INI file, and within that the 2 variables, which is your global key and I think the domain name that you're applying this to. But you can look that one up. And once that file is created, you'll be able to run this command using Cloudflare as long as you've installed these other packages. Now, I'm going to visit Cloudflare for just a moment. And we'll go to one of the domains I have there. And we're going to look at DNS once we get in. So we've clicked on the domain name that we're dealing with, then we've clicked on DNS. And so you've got to have that set up here for the rest of it to work. Somebody somewhere has got to point to your server, right, and say this is where I want the information to load to. When you when your domain name initially comes up, your registrar, wherever your name is hosted, is the first person that gets to see that visitor. Then they look to see where does this website live, or if not where the website live, where does the DNS live that's controlling where the website lives. And in my case, my registrar is GoDaddy. I've told it to use Cloudflare for my DNS, which is another little twist you don't really have to do. That's what I'm doing. That's why you hear Cloudflare mentioned. And then within Cloudflare, you set up the DNS and you put in the server name, the IP address that it's pointing to. And in my case, I've got the two domains, the subdomain and the parent domain. And so that's it. So these will point to the router. And if I haven't covered this earlier, I suppose I'd better cover this right now. When it goes to the router, yeah, this needs to be talked about. Okay. In your router, you've opened up these ports, 27, 22. Well, guess what? Your router is going to block that port. That's what it's designed to do. It's going to block port 80, port 443, 27, 22. It's going to block them all. So you need to go into the port forwarding section of your router and make sure that those ports are open. So find port forwarding, add the port that you want to open. At a minimum, we need these three open. And you're going to want to point them to the IP address of your server. So if we come back to my server and I type in ifconfig, you'll notice that among others, I have right here an IP address of the 79.40 subnet, which is what we have here. And a friendly description of some kind. And once you've added that and saved it, from that point forward, your router is no longer going to block that traffic. It'll let it get to the server. The server is listening for things coming in on port 80, Nginx is in particular, and 443. And when it detects it based on the domain name, it'll either process it as an Nginx website, or it'll say, oh, that's in this list right here in this server virtual host file, and we're supposed to do the following with it, and it transparently loads that Apache website. Now you got one little additional step in this process that could throw you a gotcha, and those gotchas can take days to work out. I've already been down these roads, so let me let you in on it. The router that you just saw was my router that I purchased. It's an edge router, and it goes behind the ISP's modem. You know, everybody's got an ISP. Somebody's supplying their internet. In our case, it is Comcast. Okay, so I have a couple of different servers in my store, and I like to control what's happening. I don't want Comcast or any ISP to be in control of what all the rules are. I want them to be disabled and control that on a device that I'm an expert in, that I'm familiar with, that I've used before. Otherwise, you've got different, I'm a computer store, so we've got different clients with different modems and different configurations, and it'd drive you crazy. And more importantly, they're not always robust enough. So in this firewall, I've clicked on IPv4, I've clicked on custom security, and in there I have said disable the entire firewall. And so that's what it does. It's supposed to let everything through to your server at that point. What I have found, though, is it will let everything through if the server is configured with a public static IP address. In other words, if I've paid this ISP for a public static and I click disable entire firewall, it's going to send it right to that server. 80, 440, nothing's going to get blocked. Everything's open to that server. However, if that router does not have a public static IP, and now this other router that I've been demonstrating uses a dynamic static IP, which means the internet service provider can change it at will. Every time the modem is rebooted, they may change my publicly viewable router. IP address. And so the one I was depending on doesn't work, so I've got some scripting that updates that IP address, and this all gets very confusing, and I've got another video on that. But the long and short of it is, because it's not that the router itself is not configured as a public static IP, it still blocks the ports, despite the fact that I tell it not to. So I had to go into the firewall of my ISP down here under Advanced, and I had to specifically tell it, open 80, 443, and 2722 to this machine, 10.1.10.226. Now that is an internal IP address, and if I go to the dashboard of my my router, my edge router, you'll see that IP address right here. And that is that's essentially, it's the IP address that the router receives or is given by the modem's DHCP, my internet service provider's DHCP. It gives it that IP address. You would do well to make that a static internal IP address, map that to static internally, so at least it doesn't change. But that's how that happens. So I'm saying port forward, open these ports to that server, now to that router, and then in the router I'm saying pass that on down the line. Open, open those same ports to this IP address, which is, so it's kind of a daisy chain thing, and it opens that to the server itself, and then that's where Nginx picks up and says, oh, it's 80, but it's one of these sites, so display it as an Apache 2722. But fortunately, it doesn't put the 2722 in the browser, so it's all transparent to the end user. And I think that covers it. So a lot of moving parts, and God, I've learned a lot of lessons in the process of over a period of years that has culminated, quite frankly, only in the last couple days. So I would love to have found this video as I was trying to sort this out. And I hope it's of great help to you. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.